This is the book, supposedly an international bestseller, In Defense of Atheism, The Case Against Christianity, Judaism and Islam by Michael Onfray. And there's a couple of people who put a comment below the title. A wonderful, invigorating blast of sanity. William Boyd, and brace yourself, Toronto Star. In Defense of Atheism. Michael Onfray was born in 1959. This is the author. He is the author of over 30 books. A high school philosophy teacher for 20 years, he resigned from the state education sector and in 2002 set up the popular University of Caen. He divides his time between Normandy and Paris. Must be a traveller. In Defense of Atheism, The Case Against Christianity, Judaism and Islam, Michael Onfray, translated from the French by Jeremy Legat. The concept of God, invented as the counter-concept of life, everything harmful, poisonous, slanderous, the whole hostility unto death against life, synthesized in the concept in a gruesome unity. The concept of the beyond, the true world, invented in order to devaluate the only world there is, in order to retain no goal, no reason, no task for our earthly reality. The concept of the soul, the spirit, finally immortal soul, invented in order to despise the body, to make it sick, wholly to oppose what, with a ghastly liberty, everything that deserves to be taken seriously in life. The questions of nourishment, abode, spiritual diet, treatment of the sick, cleanliness and weather, in place of health, the salvation of the soul, that is folie séculaire, manic depressive insanity, between penitential convulsions and hysteria about redemption. The concept of sin, invented along with the torture instrument that belongs with it. The concept of free will, in order to confuse the instincts, to make mistrust of the instincts second nature. Nietzsche, Ecce Homo, or behold the man. Contents page. Part 1, Atheology. 2, Atheism and Escape from Nihilism. 3, Towards an Ethology. Atheology. And it continues. And then bibliography. Preface. Desert memory. After a few hours on the trail in the Mauritanian desert, the author saw an old herdsman travelling with his family. His young wife and his mother-in-law rode camels. His sons and daughters were on donkeys. The group carried with them everything essential to survival and therefore to life. The sight of them gave the author the impression that he had encountered a contemporary of Muhammad. Burning white sky, scattered scorched trees, uprooted thorn bushes blown by the desert wind across unending vistas of orange sand. The spectacle evoked the geographical and psychological background of the Quran, and the turbulent period of camel caravans, nomad encampments and clashing desert tribes. The author thought of the lands of Israel, Judea and Samaria, of Jerusalem and Bethlehem, of Nazareth and the Sea of Galilee. Places where the sun bakes men's heads, desiccates their bodies, afflicts their souls with thirst. Places that generate a yearning for oases, where water flows cool, clear and free, where the air is balmy and fragrant, where food and drink are abundant. The afterlife suddenly struck the author as a counterworld invented by men, exhausted and parched by their ceaseless wanderings across the dunes or up and down rocky trails, baked to white heat. Monotheism was born on the sand. It was nightmare at Ouidain, east of Chinguetti, where the author had travelled to see the Islamic libraries long buried in the sand. Even today, sand dunes are patiently but inextricably swallowing up whole villages. Abdur Rahman our driver, or the author's driver, unrolled his prayer mat under the stars in the courtyard of the house where the author was staying. He was quartered in a small room, the author, with a makeshift mattress. As the full moon shone on Abdurrahman's black skin, the blue-grey light caused his flesh to appear purple. Slowly, as though impelled by the ancestral movements of the planet, he knelt, lowered his forehead to the ground and prayed. Light from dead stars reached down to us in the hot desert night. The author felt that he was witnessing a primitive ritual similar to humankind's earliest act of worship. As they continued their journey the next day, the author talked with Abdurrahman about his religion. Surprised that a Westerner, a white man, was interested in Islam, he challenged every assertion the author had made. The author had just read the Quran, pen in hand, and he had memorized several passages word for word. But his unquestionable faith led him to deny that any verses in his holy book were contrary to basic Islamic principles of goodness, tolerance, generosity, and peace. Holy war, proclamation of jihad against unbelievers, a fatwa issued for the execution of an author, state-of-the-art terrorism. Madmen did those things, certainly not Muslims. Abdurrahman did not like it. There he was, the author, a non-Muslim, reading the Quran and pointing out that, despite the many chapters that comforted him and supported his beliefs, there were just as many verses in the same book that justified armed fighters wearing the green banner of martyrdom, Hezbollah terrorists wrapped in explosives, the Ayatollah Khomeini condemning Salman Rushdie to death, the kamikaze attackers flying commercial aircraft into Manhattan's towers, and Bin Laden's disciples beheading civilian hostages. The author was skirting blasphemy. They lapsed into silence in that landscape, devastated by the sun's fire. 2. Ontological jackal. After hours of silence and the same unchanging desert scenery, the author returned to the Quran and the prospects of paradise. Did Abdo believe that the Quran's fantastic description of paradise was meant to be taken literally or as a symbol? Rivers of milk and wine, beautiful virgins, beds of silk and brocade, celestial music, magnificent gardens. Yes, he said, adding, this is what it is like. And hell? Just as the Quran says it is. What of Abdurrahman himself, a man of near saintly ways, considerate, tactful, willing to share, ever mindful of others, gentle and calm, at peace with himself, with others and with the world? Would he one day experience those delights? Yes, I hope so, he replied. The author wished it for him with all his heart, but deep down he knew that he was wrong, that he was deceived. After another silence, he went on to say that before entering paradise he would have accounts to settle. He was worried that his whole life as a pious believer would probably not be enough to make up for a certain error that he committed, one that might well cost him peace and life everlasting. What crime? A murder? A mortal sin? As Christians say? Yes, in a way. Once in his car he ran over a jackal. Abdo was driving too fast that night, over the speed limit, but it was a desert trail and approaching headlights were visible from miles away. The road was clear, he saw nothing ahead, when suddenly a jackal leaped out of the shadows, and 2 seconds later it was dying under the wheels of his car. Had he obeyed the rules of the road, he would not have committed that act of sacrilege, killing an animal when he had no need to eat it. Apart from the fact that the Quran makes no such stipulation, surely we cannot be held responsible for everything that happens to us. Yeah, that's like Hinduism. You can't step on snails or bugs or whatever because they're your reincarnated ancestors, supposedly. Imagine that, living a life of not stepping on insects. Right? Oh, there's an insect. Oh, watch out, there's another one. All that sort of stuff. Not to kill a fly. That would be very hard, wouldn't it? Especially if you put your hand down and squashed an ant by accident. But Abdurrahman believed that we are held responsible for everything that happens to us. Allah, or God, is behind even the smallest of incidents. Allah used this event to demonstrate the necessity of submission to the law, to rules, to order, because even the most trifling transgression brings us closer to hell. Without one sin, and you're doomed forever. It can even lead us there directly. The jackal long haunted his nights, keeping him from falling asleep, and he often saw it in his dreams, barring the road to paradise. As he spoke of it, his emotions resurfaced. His father, a wise old man in his 90s, who had fought in World War I, was uncompromising. Clearly, Abdo had failed to respect the law and would have to account for his crime on the day he died. In the meantime, I know that's when you first pronounce that set of sentences, and then you're officially Muslim and God has forgiven you. Okay, so these sins are after. Abdo had failed to respect the law and would have to account for his crime on the day he died. In the meantime, he must strive in the smallest actions to atone as best as he could. The jackal would be waiting at the gates of paradise. The author would have given anything for the animal to disappear and liberate the soul of this honest man. It may seem truly remarkable that this good man with his humble aspirations should share the same faith as the September 11 pilots. One bore the burden of a jackal and opportunity thrown to the dogs. The others rejoiced in the annihilation of the greatest possible number of innocent people. That can't be true, for it was all an inside job. Abdo believed that an inside job by non-Muslims. Abdo believed that paradise might deny him entrance because he had turned a carry-on eater into carry-on. The 9/11 terrorists believed that they had earned eternal bliss by consigning the lives of thousands, including fellow Muslims, to ashes. Yet the same book inspired both types of men operating at opposite ends of the human spectrum, one aspiring to saintliness, the other carrying out an act of inhuman cruelty. Mystical postcards. The author had often seen God in the course of his life. There in the Mauritanian desert, under a moon that repainted the night in blue and violet, in the cool mosques of Benghazi or Tripoli in Libya. On his trip to Cyrene, the home of Aristippus, not far from Port Louis on Mauritius, in a shrine dedicated to Ganesh, the colourful elephant-headed Hindu god. In a synagogue in Venice with a yarmulke on its head. Here, the choir of Orthodox churches in Moscow, waiting at the entrance to the Novodevichy monastery, while inside priests with magnificent voices, gold-robed and swathed in incense, prayed with grieving family and friends over an open coffin. In Seville, standing before the Virgin de la Macarena, among women in tears and men with ecstatic faces. In Naples, in the church of San Gennaro, god of the city, built at the foot of the volcano, whose dried blood is said to liquefy at set times. At the Capuchin convent in Palermo, filing past 8,000 skeletons of Christians, all dressed up in their most splendid clothes. At Tbilisi in Georgia, where passers-by are invited to share boiled bloody mutton under trees fluttering with small votive handkerchiefs hung there by devout Christians. On St. Peter's Square, one day when the author had neglected to check the calendar, he was there to revisit the Sistine Chapel, but it was Easter Sunday and John Paul II was projected on a giant screen. His mitre had slipped on his head, and he might have been speaking in tongues as he mumbled his divine message into the microphone. The author had seen God elsewhere too, and in other forms, in the icy waters of the Arctic during the landing of a salmon caught by a shaman, damaged by the net and ritually returned to the cosmos from which it had been extracted, in a back kitchen in Havana where a Santeria priest performed a ceremony that involved a crucified, smoked guilty and a handful of volcanic rocks and seashells, in a voodoo temple deep in the Haitian wilderness, among basins stained by red liquids, the air filled with the acrid smells of herbs and extracts, the walls decorated with drawings to gain the favour of the lover. In Azerbaijan, at Surakhani, near Baku, in a Zoroastrian fire worshippers temple, in Kyoto in Zen gardens, excellent exercises in negative theology. The author also had seen dead gods, fossil gods, gods as old as time itself. At Lascaux, the author was stunned by the cave paintings in their earthly womb, where the soul ebbs and flows under the vast layers of time. At Luxor, in Egypt, in the royal buried chambers, located deep underground, watched over by men with dogs, heads by scarabs and inscrutable cats. In Rome, in the temple of Mithras, who slew the cosmic bull, and whose cult might have transformed the world had it possessed its own emperor, Constantine. In Athens, climbing the steps of the Acropolis, on the author's way to the Parthenon, as his mind dwelt on the city below where Plato had met Socrates. In none of those places did the author feel superior to those who believed in spirits, in the immortal soul, in the breath of the gods, the presence of angels, the power of prayer, the effectiveness of ritual, the validity of incantations, communion with voodoo spirits, hemoglobin-based miracles, the Virgin's tears, the resurrection of a crucified man, the magical properties of cowrie shells, the value of animal sacrifices, the transcendent effects of Egyptian saltpeter, or prayer wheels. Never, but everywhere, the author saw how readily men construct fables in order to avoid looking reality in the face. The invention of an afterlife would not matter so much were it not purchased at so high a price. Disregard of the real, hence willful neglect of the body world there is. Willfully neglect of the only world there is. While religion is often at variance with immanence with man's inherent nature, atheism is in harmony with the earth, life's other name. In defence of atheism. Introduction. Keeping company with Madame Bovary. In Flaubert's novel, Madame Bovary relieves her despair by pretending many people do the same. Without romantic daydreams, their lives would be utterly desolate. A man can certainly avoid facing tragic reality by imagining himself as somehow different from the being he truly is, but only at the cost of turning himself into something unrecognisable. The author does not despise believers. He finds them neither ridiculous nor pathetic, but he loses all hope when he sees that they prefer the comforting fairy tales of children to the cruel hard facts of adults. Better the faith that brings peace of mind than the rationality that brings worry, even at the price of perpetual mental infantilism. What a demonstration of metaphysical sleight of hand, and what a monstrous price. Having realised all this, the author experienced the feeling that always arises deep within him when he is confronted with the symptoms of indoctrination and deception. Compassion for the sufferer, coupled with burning anger toward those who perpetuate the deception. No hatred for the man on his knees, but a fierce resolve never to collude with those who urge him to adopt this humiliating posture and keep him there. Who would not sympathise with the victims of fraud, and who would not approve of battling the perpetrators? Yet we have experienced Christian friends especially, who have tried every trick in the book to get us along to their church and sitting on the pews or the seats in their church, listening to sermons, etc. They will try tricks like, oh, there's a great movie at the church, you should see it. Up at the car, go see it. Oh, my friend, he's a Jew, he's from Israel, he just came back. He knows all about that. Very interesting. Let's go see that guy. Hop in the car, let's go see him. End up in the church. Or, hey, you feel hungry? I'll shout you some McDonald's or Burger King or something. Yeah, my shout. Okay, let's hop in the car, end up in the church. Okay. And then they ring you up when they finally leave your house. They ring you up and say, oh, the devil's got you, or this sort of stuff. And they just basically a lot of them want to know, where do you live, who do you live with, how many do you live with, do you have a job, do you have money, what's your amount of income, what are your expenses, where do you live, we'll drop you there, we'll pick you up, etc, etc. You come to the door with chocolates or Easter eggs or something at Christmas, right? Ho ho ho, here you go, here's a box of chocolates, and they step in your house, right? That's their way in. This is reality. This is a true story. Spiritual poverty engenders self-renunciation is just as significant as other deficiencies, whether sexual, mental, political, or intellectual. How ironic that other people's credulity should bring a smile to the face of the man who is supremely unaware of his own. The Catholic who eats fish on Friday derides the Muslim who refuses pork, who in turn scoffs at the Jew for refusing shellfish. The Lubavitcher swaying at the Wailing War looks askance at the Christian kneeling on a prayer stool, and at the Muslim lay out his prayer mat in the direction of Mecca. Yet none concludes that the mote in his neighbour's eye might be smaller than a beam in his own. No one reaches the opinion that the critical mind, so relevant and always so welcome when applied to others, would be put to good use in a scrutiny of one's own beliefs. Human credulity is beyond imagination. Man's refusal to see the obvious, his longing for a better deal, even if it is based on pure fiction, his determination to remain blind have no limits. Far better to swallow fables, fictions, myths or fairy tales than to see reality in all its naked cruelty, forcing him to accept the obvious tragedy of existence. Homo sapiens wards off death by abolishing it. To avoid solving the problem, he wishes it away. But like Kenneth Copeland in the virus, I blow you away. And it was still around. After that, the naive and foolish believer knows that he is immortal, that he will survive the carnage of Judgment Day. Prophecy is waiting to pounce. The author cannot fault those who need a metaphysical crutch in order to bear their lot. On the other hand, he is diametrically opposed to those who preach the ascetic ideal, and who also care for themselves in so doing. We are on opposite sides of the existential barricade. The traffic in afterlives benefits the men who engage in it by providing them the means to bolster their faith, for they find in it the material essential for reinforcing their own need for mental help. Just as psychoanalysts often treat others in order to avoid questioning themselves too closely about their own weaknesses, so the vicars of monotheist gods voice their vision of the world on the faithful, and day by day their own convictions become more secure. Masking one's own spiritual poverty or poorness while exaggerating the same weakness in others, avoiding the display of one's own shortcomings by dramatizing those of the world at large, are tactics crying out to be denounced. No one is faulting the believer, but with the man who claims to be his shepherd, the case is different. As long as religion remains a purely private matter, we contend simply with neurosis, psychosis, and other personal factors. We deal with what aberrations we can, provided they do not threaten or endanger the lives of others. So if you're going to say someone has a neurosis, a belief system, they have a neurosis or psychosis, and other personal factors, they're mental, they're mad in the head, etc., you need to go with them to some specialist to see if they actually are, to verify if they actually are, rather than just say they are, because it's a presumption or an assumption. It's not truth. The author's atheism leaps to life when private beliefs becomes a public matter, when in the name of a personal mental pathology we organise a world for others. For between personal existential anguish and management of the body and soul of our fellow human beings, there exists a whole world in which those who profit from human anguish lurk in concealment. If people are collecting money from other people's sufferings to make themselves wealthier or richer or fatter, that's a no-no. Redirecting their own death fixation toward the world at large neither saves sufferers nor alleviates their suffering, but it contaminates the universe. The attempt to avoid negativity merely spreads negativity around like manure. Not necessarily. You've got to have a balance. Okay, you can rid yourself of so much negativity and have so much positivity, but like yin yang, up down, left right, female male, there's got to be that balance. The attempt to avoid negativity merely spreads negativity around like manure. Well, if you go spread positivity around, natural positivity, none of this fake self-help book stuff. We're repeating what someone else, some guru or expert has said. Right? It can bring a light to other people, right? Make other people happier, and so forth. The attempt to avoid negativity merely spreads negativity around like manure, ushering in a wholesale mental pandemic. In the name of Yahweh, God, Jesus, and Allah, those convenient excuses, Moses, Paul of Tarsus, Constantine, and Muhammad, exploit the dark forces that penetrate them, that work so powerfully within them. Well, Emperor Constantine, yeah, he looked at himself eventually as Apollo, or even greater than Apollo, constructing monuments, his Arch of Triumph and all that sort of stuff, claiming himself to be a god, and so forth. Muhammad, was he one for his people and against everybody else, or was he the real deal? They exploit the dark forces that penetrate them, that work so powerfully within them. By projecting their sombre visions on the world, they blacken it still further, and with impunity. The pathological grip of the death fixation does not heal itself through chaotic and magical muck spreading, but by philosophical work upon oneself. So you listen to people like Plato, Pliny the Older, Pliny the Younger, and so forth, to make yourself a better being. Yeah. Interesting. Well conducted introspection dispels the dreams and delirium on which gods feed. Atheism is not therapy but restored mental health. Okay. At times we get a lot of people coming at us very nastily. We were quite surprised the other day that someone commented who was an atheist. They didn't have a inch of belief ever since childhood or whatever, and they were really nice and they complimented us and everything. But there's these ones that are just total trolls, total haters, and they want to destroy, trample underfoot anyone's belief system, especially Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all do it to each other as well. Maybe other religions do it to their competition, the opposition, etc. as well. We don't hear much of that. Well, we're not in those circles. Continuing. Rekindling the Enlightenment. This work on oneself requires philosophy, not faith, belief, fables, but reason and properly directed thought. So that philosophy, would that be like sound morals, ethics, precepts, principles, etc. from ancient philosophers? We must fight against obscurantism, that fertile loam of all religions, with the weapons of the Western rationalist tradition. Sound use of our understanding, rational ordering of our minds, implementation of a true critical will, general mobilization of our intelligence, the desire to evolve while standing on our own feet. All these are strategies for dispelling phantoms. In other words, we need a return to the spirit of light, of enlightenment that gave its name to the 18th century. Okay. There is certainly much to be said on the historiography of the luminous century. With the French Revolution fixed firmly in the memories and writing in its wake, the historians of the following century gave retrospective preference to whatever seemed to have contributed to that still recent event. They invoked the ironic deconstructions by Voltaire, by Montesquieu, with the separation of the three powers, by the Rousseau of the social contract, by Kant and the cult of reason, by D'Alembert, the master builder of the encyclopedia, etc. But these dazzling Enlightenment figures, respectable, indeed politically correct, are the boldest at 19th century historians could stomach. So, would you take on board the philosophy of, say, Oscar Wilde, who was a known homosexual? Who may be pushing homosexual undertones in his philosophy, etc., etc. Or someone like, what's that guy's name? He's a mid-century theologian, etc., scribe, etc., writing love letters to a man, saying, "Oh, why don't you love me like a woman, the love of a woman," all this sort of stuff, and so forth. Would you adopt their philosophy? Would you adopt maybe it's not a very good example. We're going to say Hans Christian Andersen, etc. Those who apparently had weird fetishes, possibly towards children. This is just what we've come across, and so forth. Would you adopt their philosophy if they had a philosophy? The dazzling Enlightenment figures, respectable, indeed politically correct, are the boldest that 19th century historians could stomach, according to the author. He prefers sharper, more direct and much bolder shafts of light, for behind their seeming diversity, all the revered figures mentioned above were united in deism. They strenuously rejected atheism, and they added an equal and sovereign contempt for materialism. And the essential, in other words, contempt for a host of alternative philosophical options that effectively constituted a left wing of the Enlightenment, a pole of radicalism that was soon forgotten, but which might be usefully invoked today. Kant is a monument of timid audacity. The 600 pages of his critique of pure reason contain the ingredient for blowing Western metaphysics sky high, but the philosopher ultimately shrinks from the task. The separation of faith and reason, of presiding deities and concrete phenomena, is a step in the right direction. According to the author, a little more effort would have obtained for one of these two worlds. For one of these two worlds, reason, the right to claim precedence over the other, faith. It would also have made possible an unsparing analysis of the whole question of belief, but Kant stops short. In declaring the two spheres separate, he allows reason to abdicate its powers. He lets faith go scot-free, and religion is saved. Kant can then postulate, why did he need so many pages in order merely to postulate? God, the soul's immortality, and the existence of free will. Three pillars, along with the death drive of all religion. Well, you don't have free will. God hasn't given you free will because He demands that you follow exactly what He's commanding. His principles, His morals, His laws, etc. That's not free will. But He has given you a choice, i.e. choose who you will serve this day, God or the devil, etc. Once again, God, the soul's immortality, and the existence of free will, three pillars along with the death drive of all religion. Once again, what was the Enlightenment? We know that Kant wrote a 1784 essay entitled What is Enlightenment? Is it still readable over 2 centuries later? Yes. We can and we must subscribe to the Enlightenment Project, according to the author. Okay? He's prompting you to do that, which remains as viable as ever. It aims to lift man out of his infantile condition and set his feet on the path to adulthood. Yes, man is often in a state of infantilism because we watch debates, Sunday the TV House of Consciousness debates, and when cornered, some people of certain groups, cults, movements start to act childish. They start to get personal. They start to make assumptions. Okay? And then they try to run away when they make those statements. They say, oh, there's something else I've got to do, I've got to go. Right, they start it and then they run. Okay? And then they come back later on because they brag to their group, oh, I defeated this person and that person in a debate, when they actually didn't. They ran away. and then they'll come back and they'll do the same thing over and over again. Okay? And they'll start swearing, carrying on and all that sort of stuff. Bragging that, oh yeah, I had a bottle of scotch the other day. Is that what a Christian does? Or a believer in the Most High does? Gets drunk on Scotch whiskey or whiskey wild turkey or something behind the scenes? Each to his own, but don't bring it to the debate. You're drunk, you're drinking, and you're carrying on, you're swearing, cussing at everybody. That's definitely not holiness, is it? Okay, once again, what was the Enlightenment? We know that Kant wrote a 1784 essay entitled What is Enlightenment? Is it still readable over 2 centuries later? Yes, we can and we must subscribe to the Enlightenment project, which remains as viable as ever. It aims to lift man out of his infantile or childlike condition and set his feet on the path to adulthood, to remind him of his own responsibility for his infantile state, his childlike state, to inspire him with the courage to use his intelligence, to give himself and others the capacity to attain self-mastery, to make public and communal use of his reason in every field, with no exception, and not to accept as revealed truth what emanates from public authority. A magnificent project. Why then did Kant have to be so un-Kantian? For how can we permit the attainment of adulthood and at the same time prohibit or disallow the use of reason in the religious sphere, where it prefers the faithful to have the minds of children, which prefers the faithful to have the minds of children, because they're the most gullible, aren't they?